Today we're going to be discussing a topic that I've been, it has taken us quite a while to get this one scheduled in. We schedule our coaching conversations well in advance, but we're discussing a topic that for us at the Coaching Academy, as coach training providers, we take this topic really seriously here at the Coaching Academy. It's really also important to the coaching industry too, and that's the topic of neurodiversity. Now, last year we had a fantastic coaching conversation on diversity, equity and inclusion, and it was a fantastic coaching conversation. I had 3 guests with me that day, and interestingly, because of a comment that Kate, one of my guests today, popped in the chat box, I asked her to join the conversation, and we had a little bit of a conversation about neurodiversity within that, which then sparked the idea of having a dedicated conversation around that. Now, if you're interested in watching that fantastic conversation on diversity, equity and inclusion, and you haven't seen it, it does sit on the Student Online Learning platform and also on the Coaching Academy's YouTube channel. But as I say, within that, we just scratched the surface of neurodiversity. And this is why I'm so excited to have not one guest, but 2 guests here today. And I've got the pleasure of talking to Coaching Academy trainers and neurodiversity sort of specialists with their own lived experience as well, Kate Baily and Rebecca Daniel. Now, in this conversation today, we're going to be discussing the importance of neurodiversity in the world of coaching, because this is where this conversation needs to sit. So just be mindful of that. It is a huge topic. We are very much sitting it in the world of coaching. Also, the awareness that we as coaches, as professional coaches need, and how we can be more mindful of neurodiversity in our coaching circles and in our coaching conversations and in our coaching practice. So if you're looking to be neurodiversity inclusive, which by the looks of how many of us are here today, there's lots of you that are looking at that. If you're looking to really develop your awareness, then this conversation is going to give you a better understanding of the tools, approaches to coach others to be at their best. Now, I hope you have your learning journals with you today, because you are going to have lots of nuggets of inspiration and information to take away. And I can't wait, because I know that I'm going to be taking away lots too. So let me dive right in and say welcome, ladies, to Coaching Conversations. I'm so pleased and privileged that you can both be here today for this brilliant conversation. Let me start by asking both of you, if you don't mind, just to share a little bit about your coaching journey, a little bit about your background in relation to this particular topic, neurodiversity, and why this topic is important for us to have. Sorry, I'm breaking all coaching rules here by asking you sort of like a triple-headed question there, but there you are. I've done it. There you are, hands up. But that's sort of where we're going to go. Kate, can I start with you, lovely Kate Baily? Welcome. So a little bit about you and your background and why this topic is close to your heart.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. So I trained with the Coaching Academy. I knew I was very interested in coaching as a kind of process, very drawn to that kind of talking to people. Wasn't sure whether to go into counselling or therapy, and then came along to one of your 2-day events and just fell in love, basically. And I love that kind of strength-based, forward-focused element to coaching. So I really did. I fell in love. I trained with the Coaching Academy, and I can only say that it really unlocked a lot of doors for me, because my niche, as you know, Sharon, is I work in midlife transition, but with a special focus on sobriety and well-being. And because of the coach training and because of the way I was working in that field, it also enabled me to become an author, which is a long-term dream of mine. So I'm the author of 2 books, I've done a podcast, and really, the rest is history. So I'm really grateful to the Coaching Academy and the kind of robust training that I felt that I got there as my grounding in coaching. And also, obviously, now I'm a coach trainer, as an associate coach trainer with you. So it's wonderful, and I would echo that. Go for it, because it's a fantastic journey. It's a fantastic journey. And so to go on to the neurodivergence and neurodiversity element, there's a professional and a personal element to this as well, because as I was kind of learning about this topic, I kept seeing this pop up, not only on sober forums and with clients, because there is a big link there between between self-soothing, whatever. We could dive into that, probably not on this webinar, but with alcohol use disorder. But also at the same time, my son was diagnosed, so this is going back about 4 years, diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So I was really putting all of this together from a personal perspective as a mum, saying, oh my goodness, this is fitting at home, this is fitting at work. I then started noticing traits with myself and was wondering about this, piecing it together in the family, going, ooh, Uncle so-and-so, yeah, okay, obviously I'm not diagnosing anyone, but I was picking up these traits. Then my daughter is 12 and she was recently diagnosed with autism, and I've been recently diagnosed with ADHD, as sort of following my children's journey and really, kind of almost walking the walk with them as well, and doing a bit of the family work around what it means to be living with, and again, we'll dive into this, a kind of spiky profile with all its joys and its challenges as well.
Oh, thank you, Kay. And really interesting how you sort of started your coach journey and sort of used your skills and knowledge to sort of start to sort of pick up all what was going on for not just yourself, but what was going in the family, and having those wonderful coaching conversations to move that forward. Thanks, Kay. Rebecca, wonderful Rebecca Daniel, welcome. If you've not met Rebecca before, she's one of our coach trainers on the Coaching and Education programme, comes with a wealth of experience, but welcome, Rebecca. Same question to you, really. So tell us a little bit about you, how you, I was going to say fell into coaching, but I'm measuring you by my own low standards. I fell into coaching, so I'm sure it wasn't the same for you. Sort of how coaching found you, or how you found coaching, and a little bit about your background in respect of this particular topic.
Hey Sharon, and welcome to everyone else that's joining us, and thanks for having me. I would say I fell into coaching, but coaching also found me at a time when I needed it, so a bit of both. I'll probably start from the very beginning, because that leads me up until the point that I am at today. So I have a background in the education sector. It's where I started off at the age of 21 and remained in the education sector for over a decade. My background specialised in English, literature, literacy and language, and the school that I was in had a SEND rate of about 38 to 42%. So it was a mainstream state school, but the SEND percentage was quite high. So I had to kind of navigate and learn. We don't really get taught at teacher training, or not back then, we didn't, how to create inclusive classrooms and to support young people in that area, unless you were a specialist as a Senko. So over the years, I've learned through experience, learned through exposure. Coaching found me at a time where I was navigating becoming a mother. And like, how do I juggle work and life, and how do I manage that? And I transitioned into coaching, qualified and now accredited with the ICF. I'm a coach trainer, as Sharon has said, and a coach supervisor. With my background in education, learning, development, growth, regulation, standardization, it's quite important to me. So I run a coaching business with my co-founder, which is Sarah Bramwell, who also is a trainer for the Coaching Academy. And we work with coaches and professionals focused on like elevating coaching skills alongside coaching and supervision. So that's what we do. Personally, I would say that I transitioned from coaching and dived into the neurodiversity space probably a year after I'd qualified as a coach. So I'm an associate for an organisation called Genius Within. I'm going to shout out to them because they're responsible for the knowledge that I hold today. So we specialise in coaching neurodivergent professionals. And I learned a lot in that journey. But whilst learning on that journey in my professional life, in my personal life, I was raising a little girl, very full of energy and full of beam, who I noticed exhibited some traits, some neurodivergent traits. And I was very conscious at that stage whether to, you know, like categorize, diagnose. I was like, no, let's just, time will tell. She's still very young. She's only 6 at the moment. But now we are on a pathway. We've been on the pathway for about 3 years, awaiting an ASD and ADHD diagnosis for her, as well as being the daughter to my mother, who is epileptic, which is a neurological condition. So, you know, I think my lived experience stems from being from a very young child, growing up now into motherhood, both personally and professionally. So that's where I sit at the moment.
Fantastic, wonderful. And Genius Within is the most amazing organisation. If you haven't come across them, say Rebecca rightly did a shout out to them, please do look them up. They've got some fantastic resources on there to support sort of your extra knowledge, if there's sort of anything else that you would like as a result of this conversation. Thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca, let me come back to you first before sort of moving back over to Kate. I mean, again, just always so grateful for people to share their journeys and their lived experiences, because this is all about people. Coaching is about people centric, isn't it? So it's the stories that make us who we are, and you know, the road that we travel along the way. And often, you know, we see the person, but we don't necessarily know, see, or understand the journey that they have walked or experienced to get where they are today. Where neurodiversity is concerned, let's take it right back. Can you give us, those of us that need it, because I appreciate there's going to be lots of different levels of experience here today, can you give us a definition of what, you know, sometimes we see it just as the abbreviation ND, you know, and which is, you know, definitions are, you know, tricky, aren't they? And abbreviations are tricky. But definition of neurodiversity, and what's the difference between that, neurodivergent, and neurotypical?
Yeah, okay. So I am going to put a caveat on this, Sharon, because, you know, like I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, my imposter is shaking, right? So this is coming from my lived experience, my understanding, my exposure. I'm not a psychologist or a neuroscientist. Like, I'm a coach, I'm a mother, I'm a female, I'm a woman, I'm just like you guys, right? But for me, there is some interchanging words as well that get thrown around. So I think that's also important. So when we talk about neurodivergence as a concept as a whole, and we talk about neurodivergent as the individual, so for me, it's about the differences and variation in our brains and our concepts and how we think, how we process information, how we communicate. I personally think that we all have a little sprinkle on the spectrum, right? At some point I do, and that's my own opinion. I think that when we look at that, people can colour a little more areas of the spectrum than others, but we refer to those who are not diagnosed as being neurotypical, not normal, just neurotypical. And when you are considered to have a diagnosis, or you are considered to be neurodivergent, it just means that there are neurological differences in the variation of your human brain. So that can mean that you are diagnosed with ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, epilepsy, multiple. I have a client that I work with that has a combination of ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia at the same time. So it could just mean that you shade a few more colours on the sphere than others, but it's a neurological difference in your brain functioning.
Fantastic, thank you. And so sort of in a nutshell, we're saying someone who's neurotypical hasn't got an official diagnosis. Neurodivergent talks about the individual with a diagnosis, and because there's all those sort of comorbidity stuff, they could have more than one diagnosis. And neurodiversity is talking about the whole thing. Is that right?
Yeah, so neurodivergence as the concept, neurodivergent at the end as the individual. And if we talk about neurodiverse, because a lot of people interchange those words, neurodiverse being the community, the group of people. And I think the only way that I've understood that is because of my background in teaching language, right? So I've had to kind of understand that myself. And it's okay if we get it wrong, because I think we have to get it wrong in order to get it right. I think what's important is for us to be confident to clarify any misunderstandings, any misconceptions, and to have these conversations, Sharon, like this one that you're beautifully holding, right? So that we can continue those learning experiences.
Yeah, brilliant. One of the things I actually took away from our conversation last year with the 3 wonderful women on diversity, equity and inclusion was not to shy away from those conversations and to have those conversations. And if you get it wrong, just say, look, I'm really sorry, I'm still learning. Help me to learn a little bit more. And I think that is such a lovely sort of response. Kate, I'm going to come to you. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, and if you do, feel free. But I wanted to ask you why, in your opinion, this is a really important topic for us to be having.
Yeah, okay. So the other thing, thank you, Rebecca. And I too have had a sort of a journey with unpicking the kind of the language for sure. And so the way I understand the neurodiverse kind of movement is advocating for the understanding that we are all different, we have different learning preferences, our brains different. So if you like, if you might you might be diagnosed, you might not be, and you might still identify as, you might be self-diagnosed as neurodivergent, for example. So there's neurodiversity, even neurotypicals sit within that, because it's about diversity and normal variations of the brain. So there's that aspect. But we can have clusters of different presentations which may then get diagnosed as neurodivergent conditions. And one of the reasons why it is so important is that we have these kind of spiky profiles. So there'll be real strengths, and there will be areas that are not as easy or that may be challenging. And we can only understand this importance by then looking at the culture, looking at medical systems, looking at employment, looking at education, because those structures, and they are still, they're sort of catching up. Well, hopefully they're catching up, because the idea is that those are really designed or have evolved in terms of, supporting the more neurotypical presentation than supporting neurodivergent, people. And so it's all quite recent as well. I think the autism spectrum sort of was this hot topic in, I think it was in the 90s, and I believe it was Judy Singer. So really, when you think about how long it takes for people to catch up, for organisations to catch up, for the word to get out, for legislation to change, this has left people unsupported and with challenges. So it is actually seen as a kind of a hidden disability, even though it's completely normal. As from the social model, it can be seen as a disability. And so if you have a diagnosis, you come under the, is it the Equality Act? I think I've got that right.
Yeah.
So it's very important to support those people, and for us that have had certain challenges. So that's what, it's very important that we are, I'm trying to remember your next question. It was, why is it important, wasn't it? Which I've partially answered. So it's very important that we as coaches, I mean, the other thing to pull out actually is they think that 1 in 5 of the UK population are neurodivergent. That's some of the stats that I've seen, and those are diagnosed. So if you want to at least double that for people who can't access diagnosis, who are on a wait list for CAMHS or adult mental health, or can't afford the private sector, because there's a big backlog with all of those and challenges to that, you might be dealing with quite a lot of the population, about 2/5. So that's, if you then use a mathematical kind of process and translate that into our coaching clients, that's going to be 4 out of every 10 coaching clients we might have could be having some kind of neurodivergent or neurodiverse needs. So as Rebecca mentioned, this could be something around communication. A common one is the executive function, which I know we'll dive into, organisation. They might also have this kind of limiting beliefs as well, because of not having that support. The narrative can be very, very negative. Mm-hmm. And the only other thing I'd say before we kind of, dive even more into that, some people who, it would depend generationally as well. So some people who are slightly older might have, not know how to advocate for themselves, or have kind of stigma and shame around it. Whereas some of the younger population may be very good at advocating for themselves, but if they've had these recent diagnoses, which do go through the deficit model, as coaches, that kind of very solution focused, practical, positive regard for our clients can be really, really good. And to know what we're dealing with and know how to support those clients can really help a long way, I think, with all of these challenges.
Wonderful, thanks, Kate. I mean, it really does sort of show why it's such an important topic, and important for us to be aware of as professional coaches, because of potentially as you get using that sort of quote unquote hidden disability, we may not know necessarily, and our client may not choose to share. And they may not know either. So it's important for us to start to be more mindful of how we can be an inclusive coach sort of around that. Rebecca, do you mind sort of starting to share with your work with Genius Within as well? How do you use your knowledge with your own clients in being a sort of a more inclusive coach where this topic is concerned?
Yeah, so I think initially when I meet my clients, whether they are via Genius or not, so they can either come via that way or come directly, the first thing for me to do is in the setup, so in that initial stage of us meeting, is to, and I'm sure as coaches we will all do this, but it's really important for me to create that space where we're at a blank canvas and I don't know the person that's in front of me, and for me to create that safe space for them to feel free and confident to disclose, because as you say, they don't have to disclose if they don't feel that they want to or need to at that moment in time. And the reason why I think that disclosure is important is because it sets up the relationship for the rest of that coaching relationship, so that I can then find out from my clients what they need from me as a coach to ensure they can show up being the best versions of themselves in our session, so that they can get the most out of that session. For me, that setup is really important, because I have some clients who say to me, right, Rebecca, I've got ADHD and I, really will probably need some reminders of my session, maybe a prompt with an email to be sent to me, or a reminder. Because I have had clients that have gone, oh, I've forgotten, and they haven't turned up, even though they really wanted to and they had the best positive intention to show up. They've forgotten for some reason. So that's why I think that initial setup, and I say it as a clean setup, is really important. What do you need to engage in this session? And what do you need from me as your coach? Like, how do you need to be and how do you want me to be? And I think that's really, really important. Once we've hopefully got to that space of disclosure, and I would really strongly recommend that it's something that you experiment with, it allows me to know what I'm going to do throughout that coaching relationship in order to make that space accessible for them. And when I mean accessibility, we have that in education, where we know that we, amend or adjust our resources, our teaching style. And I think that's the same for our coaching. It's for us to decide on, do we need captions? Do we need closed captions? Do we need, some of my clients say, Rebecca, if I'm going off and I'm going off topic, like, feel free to put me back on track. And it's about having those two-way conversations with them of like, how would you like me to bring you back on track? So I think once we've established that disclosure, we can then go to planning the conduct of how the rest of that relationship is going. What else did you want from me, Sharon? I'm just trying to think of the question now.
No, not at all. I think you've answered it beautifully. And it, just goes to show how important the competency of contracting is, doesn't it? We talk about coaching competencies, and we know that the coaching contract, that the sort of contracting with our clients and setting coaching agreements with our clients is key. But from what you're saying there, it can be, it just shows how important it really is, and how each client may want us to work with them very, very differently, and how, if we're not careful, we can layer our own lens over it, sort of, saying things like, okay, well, like I said, right, let's go right back to the beginning. Actually, I made an assumption that all of you here today would be using a coaching journal and that you would be taking notes. That might not be how it works for you. Yeah. So I've put my own filter over that. Yeah. And I've looked at it through my own lens. So we have to be really careful of that we're not doing that with our clients as well. Would you agree with that, Kate? Where would you go with that?
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with Rebecca. That sort of, the contracting being so important, 100%. And yeah, I mean, it goes back to that thing of real coaching presence as well, being really present to the person that you are with, tuning into them and following their lead in terms of pace, in terms of, what you hear the learning preferences to be, or how you contract those, using their language. So there's a lot about the coaching skills that is already a supportive process, and I think that's very comforting to know. It's very comforting to know as a coach that there's a lot in the process that's already good. There was another point I was going to make. This is the ADHD, isn't it? So I haven't got a clue what I was going to say. And yeah, so going back to that beginning of, once you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. If you've met one person with dyscalculia, you've met one person, so it is that sort of, we're coaching the client, not the condition.
I love that, Kate. So, that's for me a key takeaway from our conversation. You're coaching the person, not the condition. And I know when I've had conversations with Rebecca before, we're not there to make a diagnosis. We're there to coach the person. And what also has sort of come out really strongly from both what Rebecca and what you said there, Kate, is that we can trust in the coaching process to know that it's there. We just need to be more mindful, and maybe to take that into consideration when we're going into coaching with our clients, to be much more mindful, to be more inclusive as a coach. Kate, I know you use, because we've spoken before, you've got you work a lot sort of around sort of the sensory side of things with some of your clients for a whole range of different reasons. There's a lovely toolkit. Funnily enough, I have used it in the past with one of my clients, and it talks about your 8 sensory processing needs. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you use that as a toolkit?
Yeah, so again, necessity being the mother of invention, really part of the kind of coaching journey with my children as well, and also with myself and my clients. I realized that, again, going back to sort of my niche with the alcohol use disorder, once we stop, if you look at that almost as I don't like calling it a tool, but it is a tool kind of to regulate for a lot of people, which then stops working. So we often then find out, well, what's underneath? And often we find there's a dysregulation going on. There's a dysregulation of brain chemicals, and there's often a degree of sensory overwhelm. It's so peculiar, Sharon, honestly. It's like, it seems to be fundamental work to do with most people. Again, irrespective of whether there's a, you suspect there's a neurodivergent, condition going on. So there's 5 senses, and really it's about identifying and realizing where we might be going outside. I don't know if people have heard about the stress bucket. The stress bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller, and then we can tip over and suddenly be very dysregulated. We can be very stressed out. We can be, and then the kind of the prefrontal cortex will switch off. And that's really important if we're, for anyone. But say, for example, if we have, my sensory needs, and we see that a lot with ADHD and autism spectrum, it can really ramp up the stress. And once we become aware of, say, the sound, so we've got this, obviously the 5 senses: hearing, taste, touch, smell, and what's the other one?
Taste.
Sight.
Yeah. That was me counting on my fingers trying to figure it out.
So, it can be really lovely, because obviously coaching is a really, there's a lot of talking. It can be a very empowering tool for people to go away with and go, oh, okay, I'm going to be really curious about this. I'm going to be curious about how I relax, how I soothe, or how I kind of bring myself up if I'm a bit low, and just having that moment to check in and that moment of curiosity. So, just speaking for myself, noise cancelling headphones, I realized that both my children have something around auditory processing. I then realized I did too. So noise cancelling headphones, when I go into London, for whatever reason, is really, really important. And I know as soon as I put them on, it brings it down. So that it's a tool just for people to kind of think, okay, well, where am I? Am I feeling stressed? And then to work with the senses and to play around with, do I need to put some sunglasses on? Can I do something with music? Can I shift some kind of area of tension with that? The other element of that is that we have what's called proprioception, which is outside. So you might find it really soothing to wrap yourself up in a blanket and just bring yourself down. Anyone. And also the interoception, which is what's coming from the inside as well. And the more we work with it, the more skilled we are at catching ourselves where we're starting to get a little bit stressed before we go fully blown over outside of the window of tolerance. And I'll just sort of finish on this. The reason this is important for coaching is that once we're outside of the window of tolerance, our prefrontal cortex has just gone offline, and we are less able to generate actions in line with future outcomes and align with our goals. So we'll be making all that, no, I fancy doing this. I'm just going to go eat a bar of chocolate and go and watch telly just because I'm really, really stressed. But we could be, and that's fine sometimes, of course, but we could be making choices towards our directed outcomes. And we see that a lot again with people that I coach with ADHD. That impulsivity and that window of tolerance can be a real thing. It can be a really handy tool.
Love that. And I just sort of shared on the screen while you were talking there the arousal curve that comes from that toolkit that you were mentioning there. So it's a really lovely one. I used it with a client, and it's really, really helpful. What I wanted to ask you about, Rebecca, was if you can share a little bit more around how neurodivergent affects thinking, communication, strengths, challenges, strategies for success. So, we can sort of be mindful of that as coaches.
So I think in terms of self-disclosure, I didn't share at the beginning that I am identifying as someone who is not diagnosed, but self-diagnosed possibly with ADHD. So when Kate's talking and I'm looking at my daughter growing up, right, I'm seeing a lot of patterns. That journey may be a journey for me to take now or later or never. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because when I'm coaching, I focus on a strength-based approach. I think we all have strengths, and I call them our superpowers, and we all have challenges. But when you are diagnosed, those challenges can become heightened. And I think it's important when I'm working with our clients to focus on the strengths, focus on what is working well, how we can utilize those strengths, but also how we can utilize those strengths to possibly counteract some of the challenges. So we all can identify and exhibit and display strengths and weaknesses in different ways. So one person with ADHD will be, as Kate has said, completely different to the next person. They could be similar, there could be similarities and differences. And it's important to not go in with our magical toolkit thinking that the tools are going to work for every single person with ADHD, because it may not. So if we go with a strength-based approach and utilize those, focus on those, then we can then support our clients with those challenges. So some of the things that I notice with my clients who have ADHD is that they're really, really great in that creative space, with that like hyper focus and resilient. They're probably the most resilient humans that I know. And some of the people that I work with that are diagnosed with ASD or can self-diagnose ASD are really great in their visual perception of things. Oh my God, the most beautiful visual interpretations can be seen and exhibited. In terms of memory, honesty, dedication to things. And then when we look at challenges, again, some of the common challenges can be around organisation, time management, transitioning. I notice a lot in terms of transitioning with myself and my daughter. And in terms of our social and our communication interaction as well. So what I tend to do is, if we start with that strength-based approach and then focus on the obstacles and the challenges, what I also tend to find between my young clients, and I mean teenage, and my older clients, is that the older clients have managed to, as amazing as we are, come up with strategies ourselves without even noticing. So it's about shining a light on what we've done without even recognizing that and appreciating that. With my younger clients, the ones that are still learning about the world, learning about themselves, it's about supporting them. And I use sometimes visual aids to do that. Some of my clients may work best with like mind maps or colors. Some also may work well in terms of chunking and breaking down tasks. So the Pomodoro technique is the most common one that works best for me. Might not work best for everyone. And the one that I love the most is enhancing in our memory and practicing our awareness around memory retention. And I use Kim's game for that. So I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Kim's game, but it's a kind of game derived from a book by Rudyard Kipling, and it helps us to practice our awareness and our memory by having like objects. So I don't know if you've ever played it as a child, or you'd have objects on the table, different color objects, different sizes, different textures, and you look at those objects for about a minute or two, and then you take away the objects. You can do it on the screen as well, but you take away the object and allow that person to identify the objects that they can recall and what it is about that recall. Could it have been size or texture or color? So they're the types of things that I do with my clients that work really well. But as Kate has already alluded to, we coach the client, not the condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Pomodoro technique, and funnily enough, I am coaching a client at the moment, and he hasn't shared whether or not he has a diagnosis, and that's not the point. But we were talking about the Pomodoro technique, interestingly enough. So do you want to just expand on that a little bit for anybody who sort of says, Pomodoro technique, what's that all about? I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, so for me, I can be really, really hyper focused when I'm really engaged and interested in something. Like I could sit here and obsess about it for hours and forget to probably eat and drink and go to the toilet. But when I am on a task that might not be as engaging, I can feel like I'm sitting here for an hour and not be super productive. So the Pomodoro technique works for me in terms of enhancing my productivity and my focus. So what it is I think Pomodoro stands for, like, in Italian, it's like tomato.
Yes,
yeah, right.
is,
Okay.
yes.
So you time yourself, you give yourself bursts of time. So I use about 25 minutes. Some people use 20, but I think it's between the range of 20 to 30 minutes, but let's say 25 minutes for the sake of this. So it's stretched time of focused, like, attention on an activity. And then you break that activity by doing something different, moving location, changing activity, going for a walk, having a drink, by short bursts of about 5 minutes. So the aim of that is, for my brain and for probably some of the others who have ADHD, right? We're kind of wired to seek more pleasure. So knowing that I have those 25 minutes of focus time and I can go and do something else, oh my gosh, like, I'm so competitive. I try to beat my own clock sometimes. So it's a good activity for people to do if they really wanted to remain focused, but have that difference to their day.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. And, you know, I am very sort of keen on tools and tips and techniques. And Kate, I remember we were doing some reflective practice as coach trainers once. You may remember, because you took this away, and I did a little introductory exercise, and I do use it actually on my coaching in education module. So if anybody has joined me on that, you may remember the squiggle birds, where, you know, get people to do squiggles for a little while and then you turn them into sort of like birds and stuff. You were really blown away by that, personally and professionally. So do sort of in session tools and in session activities like that. I mean, that, you know, I found them to be helpful for all of my clients on a speaking from a general perspective. If I've asked a client and, you know, they want me to include things like that. How have you found that exercises like that and activities like that can be helpful when you're coaching in this space?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it goes back to what Rebecca said about the contracting and whether there's disclosure or whether we're just doing I mean, the way I tend to work with my clients is to see this journey as a really fascinating, like, become fascinated with your processes and yourself and your senses and how you learn, you know, all of that intel. And you've said, again, you know, actually reflective practice, you know, helping clients to understand what reflective practice is. So really bite-sized questions that they can just put in a couple of times a day and going through that in a session. I would say that it's such a simple tool, but that can be really, really useful. The idea being bite-sized. I love the squiggle birds because, again, that kind of focus, it just allows me to regulate if I'm allowed to doodle and then look up at you and then doodle again and then look up at you. So we're having just a very, you know, an exploration into what's working. And the other thing I also really contract is sensory, is to make it very explicit about sensory breaks, to say, just so you know, make sure that if you want to get up and move around, that's fine. If you want to have a glass of water, that's fine. If you need a comfort break, if you need to break the session, that's really fine as well. So, and to just sort of speak directly to your, you know, your point there, I find the psych ed really useful because I think knowledge is power. And especially if people don't actually just come into that awareness of their learning preferences, that you're even allowed to have sensory needs. If all the masking maybe that you've been doing and your elevated sense of anxiety might come from that, it's very, very empowering for people to suddenly start to be able just to explore this, you know, and have a different language around it, maybe have a different way of explaining and meeting need. All of these things are about meeting those needs and trial and error. And I think if you put it out there as, you know, bite-size exploration, no right or wrong, it provides that psychological safety for people to then advocate for themselves. They might not have been able to say, actually, I've had enough this session. I can't take any more on board, you know.
Yeah,
so we're allowing
absolutely.
that.
That's
Yeah.
where that creating the safe psychological space comes in. I'm going to pop back to Rebecca in a minute, but before I do, Kate, bite size. So not the triple-headed question that I started off with right at the beginning of the session. So
Me
take that
too.
as a learning point.
Yeah.
But also, you mentioned psych ed, and someone's just asked about that. So can you just very quickly just sort of expand on what that is?
Yeah, so I always do something around the senses, the sensory toolkit. I always do something about the stress bucket, which is, and generally I also work with talking about the autonomic nervous system, which is that fight, flight, freeze response, and that is that hyperarousal or hypoarousal, because a lot of my stuff is about that habit change. So those bits, the nuts and bolts of our physiology, I guess, is what I'm talking about, just to give those as tools to dive into. And I don't batter my clients with them. I just offer them as suggestions if they want to do a dive into them and if they've got any questions.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's so important. Rebecca, just to come to you, because we always finish with sort of asking our guests to share a learning or a takeaway for people here today, or something for them to sort of action. Have you got sort of a tip or a tool or something as a learning takeaway for the people that are here today to maybe reflect more on or to practice?
Yeah, I would probably say, rather than a tip, probably just a level of insight, and maybe just my own personal reflection in embracing neurodiversity, and applying principles of like inclusive coaching in our practice. And it's not just around neurodiversity, it's also inclusion in terms of race, in terms of sexuality, ethnicity, like religion. It's inclusive in all aspects. But for the sake of today, obviously, because we're focused on neurodiversity, I think it's important for us to continue just to create those supportive environments, adapt our communication should we need to, and utilize our strategies that are tailored for the individual client, so that we can support them in their journey, whatever that may be. But also for us as coaches to continue that ongoing journey of learning and growing, the exploration and adaptation that we need as coaches to be the best for ourselves, but also for our clients. And that's probably where I'll leave it. So continue that journey of exploration. We're never a finished article, and there's always more to learn. And it's always really great to be in spaces that are diverse, so that we can continue to learn from others as well. Conversations like this today is a starting point, but where else can you put yourself that you continue to learn from others? And I think that's something that I'm making sure that I'm more conscious of, getting comfortable with the uncomfortableness, putting myself in positions where there are people from different backgrounds, so that I can continue to learn and grow.
Oh, Rebecca, that is such a perfect thing to finish on, really, because that was probably my takeaway from the first conversation last year. Is I looked at my circle and how can I expand my knowledge if I am not sort of putting myself in circles where I am challenged to think differently. I have popped the sensory toolkit that Kate mentioned into the chat. Those of you that are still here, those that left a minute early, they missed it. What a shame. Never mind. There's always a bonus for staying to the end. So that's there, that's in the chat. It's not available, unfortunately, anymore, but Kate very kindly shared it with us, and I've shared it in the chat today. This is the beginning. This is, as I said back in last year, this is the beginnings of the conversations that we're going to be having. Rebecca, just because you're off mute at the moment, where can people find out a little bit more about you and maybe connect with you?
Yeah, I've just realised one of my clients was like, oh, you've given us an alliteration, Rebecca. So for those that have dyslexia, it's a real struggle, but you can find me at the Coaching Catalysts. I will pop that in the chat as well. And yeah, we also have like supervision experiences where people can engage for free on our listening partnership. So yeah, feel free to let me know if you want that link as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. And Kate, where can the lovely listeners find out and connect with you?
The easiest way to find me is at lovesober.com. And that links to everything that I do, lovesober.com.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask the 128 of you that are still here today, I'm going to challenge you to write down one thing. What's the one thing that you're going to take away in action as a result of this conversation here today, to challenge yourself to continue to grow and be a more inclusive coach in this particular space? Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Kate. It's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much.